Ladies and gentlemen, friends, listeners, colleagues, here we are, the weekend show as it's been newly named. And surprisingly enough to everybody who probably knows myself and Stephen, we're actually early this weekend. This is coming on a Friday, late afternoon. So Stephen, great to have you. Lovely backdrop and looking forward to the next 25, 30 minutes or so.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here. Yep, better early than not at all, as we established a couple of weeks ago, Chris.
100%, 100%. Now, Steve, tough old week again, but one nice bit of news, and for those who love their aircraft, I think this is a bit special. The BA 400, 747-400 registration G-CIVW is now going to be transferred from Cardiff tomorrow to a film set at Dunsfold Park. And that's where, for anybody who knows the location, that's where Top Gear on the BBC is produced. And it's also where Aviation Filming Limited and Aces High Limited operate out of. So I think that's fantastic. So it joins a 200 series that's been there for a while, doing film work and adverts and what have you. So I think that's brilliant. And, touch wood, when everything changes, people hopefully will be able to go and see the aircraft and admire it and get a few more long-lasting glances at the Queen of the Skies.
I think so, Chris. I think, look, I mean, that aircraft was probably, as if you think of what's happened to Concord, post operational service. They have obviously Concord. I think it's the one at Brooklands, or there's one down at Bristol. I think museum piece. There's also one up at East Fortune, up in Scotland. I think the 747. Some may even argue is more of an iconic aircraft than Concord, particularly when you think about how many people have been exposed to and flown on that aircraft over the years, compared to the very narrow group of people that had the great fortune to have flown on Concord in its history. So no, great news for that. But it seems to be sort of the story goes on a little bit forever, because I was told, last week it was the last two 74s that left Heathrow, and
there's another one.
There's another one. It's like that sort of last drink at the bar on a Saturday night. It keeps it, well, let's have one for the road, one for the road. Well, actually, 6-1 for the roads later. We sort of finally pull the pin. Maybe now this is the renaissance that we're seeing as the 74s exiting the BA fleet.
Exactly.
Good news.
It's funny what you're saying there about limited people. You just reminded me about me poor old mum, God bless her. She actually flew on Concord, and she used to tell us the stories. And I'm sure she managed to collect as many souvenirs as she could off of the plane, knowing me mum. But she
bit
was
of a kleptomaniac, was she, Chris?
Huh?
Bit of a klepto.
Yeah. The old magpie bit runs in the family, so. But she was there.
I was very fortunate as well to have flown on Concord. After the relaunch, after the accident, and before the demise, it was I wasn't as interested really in the aircraft back then as I would be now, and so unfortunately, taking things like menus or crockery or cutlery, whatever, from the aircraft didn't excite me then, which it would have done, of course, now. But as a sort of a memento. But of course, we never knew what was going to happen at that stage,
Exactly. Yeah, I think I know a few people now. They'd be happy to take the seat. But, anyhow. Moving on, another good bit of news with Emirates, Sky Cargo, setting up the world's largest GDP-compliant air cargo hub in Dubai for global distribution of the vaccines when they come on. So that's at Sky Central DWC. So that's great. Good news.
Yeah, I think it is. I think actually I had some feedback last week from some of our listeners around the discussion around pharma that we spoke about, in terms of the pharma and the supply chain being able to support the airlift, the cargo lift requirements for a vaccine, a future potential vaccine, and most were sort of rather complimenting and agreeing with our thoughts that this is a very large logistical challenge, and not just the lift itself, but actually the last mile being so difficult. But so it's great to see Sky Cargo leading the charge here and supporting the efforts at this early stage. Actually, and also with a bit of risk, Chris, because we don't actually know when this vaccine will become available, and if it becomes available. I think it needs to come available. Some bad news this week around the Oxford University produced or supported trials, in terms of one person sadly passing away who was involved in the trial. I don't know the specifics, so I have to be careful. I'm not linking it directly to the trial, but certainly that was the news that sort of emanated from the press around that. But yeah, God help us that we do find this. 'Cause I think it's the only way really that I think we can secure, you know, large scale return to as much of normality as we possibly can. So good on the Emirates Sky Cargo team for taking a lead in that regard.
Yeah, no, it's great. And what you just touched on there, Steve, about, you know, should we be focusing more now on learning to live with it rather than waiting for it to go away, whether it's through vaccines or whatever? You know, that's a big question now, because, you know, who knows what will come next, or whether it mutates, or it's a big question. So, you know, how we live with it is probably more important.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, IAG, another good little bit of positive news, restarting for the cargo market from London to Tokyo. So that's good news.
Yeah, I think any return, any net sort of returns to normal operating schedule, or return to markets is positive news. But conversely, you know, we see the same sort of thing being applied. I mean, I was flying this week, you know, and it was great to see Terminal 5 being busy, Chris. But the flight that I was on, you know, 21 passengers.
Yeah.
I think, you know, so how sustainable is it to maintain some of this connectivity that, you know, British Airways and others, you know, put back into the market in good faith, when the demand just still isn't there? So, you know, and that's all to do with, you know, people having confidence that these, markets will be remaining on green lists, or, you know, without quarantine requirements, etc. But really and truly, I think, you know, it's great to see some new announcements and announcements returning some of that capacity. But I am still skeptical, Chris, around how sustainable, you know, operating in this environment is without the right government support, without a vaccine, and, you know, critically, Chris, without the testing regime and support that the industry has been speaking about for all too long, that still hasn't been enacted upon by government, or a universal approach taken. So great to see some new markets being added there. Great to see some countries coming off quarantine lists. But really, until there's a sustainable you know, return to demand, I think I'd be cautious about sort of, you know, heralding the return of too many of these markets right now.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And then when you see IAG's third quarter results, you know, 1.3 billion loss. I mean, it's incredible. And then you got Sean Doyle asking if the industry will ever recover to what people expect, or what people would like to see. I mean, it really puts things in perspective.
Yeah, it does. I think you know, listening to Sean this week was interesting. Of course, that was you know, we spoke about Sean's appointment last week, when we did the show, and you know, he's already come out to, you know, he spoke at one of the keynotes earlier this week, and I thought he hit some really you know, really good points. Of course, you know, he's coming in there sort of, you know, I shouldn't even be critical to Alex Cruz, but I think cleaning up some of the challenges that were left open. That's not cleaning up Alex's mess, it's cleaning up the challenges that had not yet been closed, particularly on the industrial requirement, particularly around some of the customer issues, particularly around some of the crew engagement problems that were left with as a result of actually having to make some very tough decisions. But so Sean probably is riding on a wave of a little bit more, you know, positivity from the employee group and his management team. But he spoke very candidly, I thought, and I thought he spoke very well about some of the challenges, and actually saying, look, this business and this industry will never return to the same sort of normality, if you like, you know, quote unquote, that we had before. And you know, he's cautious and concerned that British Airways and more broadly industry might never return to sort of pre-COVID kind of you know, levels, operating standards, etc. So this is here for a while to come, I suspect. At the same time, I think they announced a 1.3 billion euro loss in the last quarter, which he compared to the global financial crisis. You know, the whole GFC. I think he said that the loss was something around, you know, a third of that. And yet in the last 2 quarters, they've lost masses. So, you know, really big challenges out there for asset heavy airlines like British Airways. Yeah,
doesn't it make you? I mean, it's easy to reflect, and it's easy, like hindsight and hindsight 2020. What a terrible term that's turned out to be. But it's easy to reflect on hindsight. But when you think the way people were going, and especially in our industry, and for me on the cargo side, everything was grow, fast, speed, faster, chasing prices down, margins were getting too low. I mean, that's all got to be re-geared up now, and people have got to look back. And if it was a history lesson in the future and people are looking back, they'd say, why on earth did they keep chasing and driving margins and driving things so fine and so close to the line? And then when you look at the old saying, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but at the moment, cash is reality. And what they've got to do, and we spoke about this before, Steve, the understanding and the cooperation between management and employees and unions or representative bodies, this is the time now to come together and then decide on how to reboot in the future.
I think so. I think I was having a discussion this week with some ex British Airways colleagues, and it was very eye-opening, very interesting, to understand. We're sort of reminiscing, sort of talking about the old days, and some of the antics that used to go on. But I won't mention any of the conversation that we had for fear of incriminating anyone or potentially myself. But no, we were sort of talking about the antics or sort of the jovial nature of life in aviation 20 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever. I was not there 25 years ago in aviation, but 20 years ago I was. I know you still find that hard to believe, Benjamin. Sort of reference to Benjamin Button there, poorly put across. But we were just saying, look, actually, and we did recognise, because some of these people that I was talking to, we touched on some of the contracts because we touched on the impact on supply chain, and actually we sort of said, well, I was at EasyJet in those days, and these guys were British Airways. Look, were we culpable in some of that? Were we chasing the dollar or the euro or the pound savings too much? Were we without sort of fear or favor? We were trying to do the right thing always for our employer, which was to get the best value. The best value at that time was often seen as the best price. Now that we know now, that's not best value. But did we push supply chain, particularly in the UK? When you look at the UK ground and cargo handling market, how it's changed over those 20 years, Chris.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the actors that were on the stage before who've all disappeared, and there's new actors either acquired or taken over. And you say, well, actually, were our actions in driving down the supplier margins? Well, actually, at the time when you looked at industry, I don't think they were, because airlines at those days were running on very thin margins, Chris.
Yeah.
Industry had not returned its cost of capital in 7 to 80 years, and we're running on margins, most airlines, between 5 to 7, 8, 10%. Therefore, it was right and proper in terms of aligning the procurement strategy with the airline sort of outcome to ensure your suppliers got that sort of those similar levels. So I think, that did, push a lot of suppliers to the brink who, ended up, of course, having to do more to serve as a contract than procurement had told them, because the ops guys got involved. So that's been missed. Can you help us out here? And for the right reasons they did. We're in a very different place now, Chris. You missed it. It was a catch a fly. You were trying to
it was.
You need to do that. Barack Obama, he was the best at that. I don't know if you ever saw that interview with Barack Obama, who was doing an interview one-to-one, much like this, but in person. And his hands, both hands on the chair, the arms of the chair, and without even looking, he just slapped on the fly, and he got it, and it dropped to the floor. Of course, the Animal Cruelty Brigade quickly came out and condemned him for his actions, but as you'd expect. But back to the point, they said, look, so now we're going to realign some of those things. So we know that airlines will be suffering for quite some time. We know they're going to return a lot of they drawn on a lot of their cash reserves and their debt availability, etc. So how does one reset? The question: how does one reset the relationships in an environment that's not going to be easy, for some time? When we don't expect revenues to return, for quite some time, we certainly don't expect to get the same yields that we're getting before. We're going to stimulate demand as a whole. Meantime, people are saying, well, I'm going to put my prices up for my ground handling or my cargo handling or for your insurances or for your whatever it might well be. Well, you've got to start putting your fares up. Well, putting fares up when economically, the global populace has had, been economically depressed, is also going to be a challenge. So to stimulate demand, actually, normally what we do is drop low fares into the market. So I think there's a whole dichotomy of issues in there that have to be well thought through, well kind of managed, and that's the only way that we'll do. So you've got to reset the relationship not only between the customer so between the airline potentially and the supplier, but also with the customer.
Yep.
So a massive amount of change required there to get this whole effort back on its feet.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And when you were talking there about margin figures and you were going 5, 7, and 10%, there's a lot of ground handlers I know that would have been happy with that in previous times, let alone what's going to happen in the future. But also what needs to be done, Steve, is a more of an understanding, which there appears to be. But, when you look at the way everything was geared around penalty clauses in SLAs and contracts, that's, again, like you mentioned about the hammer at the moment with the pandemic, the penalty clauses and that stance is not always the best and the most effective.
No, it's sort of usually, to coin the old adage, carrot and stick. There is a bit of that in the bonus malus. People should be incentivized to work, but actually in terms of delivering to the baseline, so the baseline requirement actually should not just be, a cost recovery. It should be, cost with a reasonable margin that rewards the supplier for their effort. However, if they go above and beyond, as an employee would expect in terms of their annual bonus, as a customer would expect from loyalty and earning rewards and be able to expend those with the airline, the same thing should be the case between supplier and airline in terms of saying, well, actually, you've gone the extra mile, you've got your ground time recovery, or you've completed all of your clean flight exercise, Chris, that we've been speaking a lot about recently.
Yes.
100% through the month. That's worth an extra X percentage back to the supplier. And the airlines, they have to recognize that if we actually engender loyalty across the supply chain, it actually cuts out a lot of the costs associated with recontracting, going to tender, going to market, ... because they are able to maintain certainty, consistency of supply. And actually, if you deliver really well, the supply delivers well for the airline, that means you're delivering well for the customer, the passenger, the forwarder, the consignee, whoever it might well be. And that, in all, is a good thing, and that therefore should be rewarded. But look, I think very difficult to do, Chris, in this environment where people will be looking to remove as many of their fixed costs and overheads as possible, and actually pay. Let's be realistic; they want to pay bottom dollar now because they simply don't have access to the kind of cash that they had previously. That's because the revenue line isn't yet there. So until that recovers, I'm not sure these discussions are fruitful for every party.
No, I agree. Right, now we're coming up to Christmas, and obviously it would be good if there was a Christmas plan with regards to what happens now to allow people to have something to look forward to, because obviously there's going to be another rough period after Christmas. But again, coming back to this hammer and what's happening, if you look at, and we spoke about it, China and Ethiopian, where there were some cases, went into China. So instead of dealing with it in a more open, robust, and looking at it from a global perspective, all they're doing is saying, right, that's it, no more flights, Ethiopian, that's it, you're banned.
I think, it's not just China, Chris. That's just one example. I think we've seen this week. Others have done the same thing. Hong Kong's done the same. I think Hong Kong, China, who knows? Could well be depending on which side of the red line you are sitting. But others have done this. So Ethiopian brought in 15 customers that had tested positive and were punitively then banned from operations. Well, actually, that doesn't engender the debate, the discussion, the collaboration between all the actors in industry and from a regulatory perspective. All it does actually is penalize, most likely, the Chinese people who are now got less access to freight payload and got less access to seats on a flight that maybe have been wanting to return to Shanghai for however many months. So actually, they shot themselves in the foot. I see that as a bit of an own goal. I think much better for us all to work together to find the right testing solutions, to find the right reporting, track, and tracing systems, and to identify the risk. Because everything we should be doing should be on a risk a risk measure, a risk level, not just punitively, bashing them for the single point failure.
No, 100% agree. And now this general governance now and looking at testing and whether they've got it right or wrong, whether they understand the real mechanics of flying, because it's so clear now. And even IATA have pushed the boat out a little bit by explaining how safe it is on an aircraft and what's involved with testing and how you can do certain things if you test before flying. And all of those things need to be done, but they need to be understood by people who are making these rules and guidelines. And it seems, Steve, that there's a lack of practical awareness, and I can't understand why greater access to people who understand what's going on aren't being used. Now, governments and testing, difficult situation. So I understand you had a little window into the political framework and a very, very nice invite to be involved in something that took place yesterday.
Yes, look, I mean, just to caveat that with, I think we've, damned if the government seems to be damned if they do and damned if they don't. For not acting soon enough, they're accused of putting people's lives at risk, and for acting and bringing sort of the curtains down or the barriers down and the enforcing some of these restrictions, they're accused of killing off people's livelihoods. So, I mean, on the one hand, you got the economists, on the other hand, you got the health experts. In the middle are the politicians and the leaders of our countries that sadly are charged with, I say sadly, not in terms of sad from a political perspective, but they are charged with looking after us. So very difficult balancing act. But you're right. I had the privilege of speaking last night directly to Matt Hancock, the UK Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and I sympathise with the fella a lot. I mean, he looked pretty exhausted after a day in his ministry. He was also in Parliament yesterday afternoon, and then he pitched up to my meeting rather late. But I'll forgive him, given he's got other priorities. But this is a result of us trying to understand how we can better support one another from an aviation industry perspective, and actually asking some of the questions around, why is it that the UK government don't view airlines and airports as critical infrastructure as other countries have done? Why is it that it's been left solely to industry to kind of try to innovate and cobble together solutions that are not universally mandated? So, Whitehall on one hand can mandate solutions for transport for London, for buses, for trains, on the East Coast mainland up to Scotland. Or why can't they mandate the same for aviation? Why haven't they taken the same level of interest in aviation, other than the air corridors that are being so, spiky and up and down and risky in any case? And I have to say, I think Mr. Hancock obviously has his hands full, as do all secretaries of state and leaders in ministries and governments across the world. But I was rather disappointed on two fronts. One was that industry does not have a seat at the table.
Correct.
So they've put a task force together to support aviation, but guess what? It's full of secretaries of state and ministers and civil servants. There is not one private sector individual. And anyway, he has sort of committed that they'll involve the right people at the right times. But political answer. And the military, as we said last week. The second thing, Chris, is the UK government have not bought in to the same acceptance that countries like Germany have, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc., who are able to open up some of these corridors by having very robust test regimes. So, I was involved this week in supporting one of our client airlines on an operation from Heathrow, and it relied on putting in place infrastructure to support testing. And I shared this with the Secretary of State, and I said, look, this is actually what's allowed us to get these passengers on this aircraft and back to their home country. And therefore, it's really critical, as we've seen Heathrow launch this week, the LAMP testing available on departure. That we've been speaking to HAL about, but for those not aware, HAL, Heathrow Airport Limited, have launched pre-departure testing, 60-minute test, uses the LAMP testing, which is many governments have accepted as being suitable for their purposes, and is currently open to restricted markets, but we were able to avail of some of the support from that unit and that clinic, and therefore that was what directly led to us getting these passengers on the flight. So I think Mr. Hancock him and his colleagues in cabinet need to look at this more widely. But unfortunately, the Secretary of State was called away for a rather more pressing discussion. So I didn't have the 45 minutes with him that I was expecting. However, nonetheless, he is extremely busy, and I'd say, look, it's a privilege to be able to talk to these senior ministers, as I have been doing through this. We've had conversations with the Home Secretary, with the chairman of the Health Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt, and with now the Secretary of State for Health. So it's very privileged access, and I'd sort of urge some of our listeners to as critical as I can be of them, Chris. They are doing every bit and working every single hour of the day to try to keep people safe, and I think that is a challenge that while some of us in aviation believe all of our actions are about safety and operational safety and keeping passengers and air cargo safe and secure, nothing quite beats a health pandemic when you've got the weight of that shoulders. So just be kind. Whilst there might be disagreements on policy, as I certainly have and had with him, we should always be kind to one another. Remember the efforts that these people are going to all the time.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. You've made me feel bad now because I think, I'm not sure, it might have been Matt who tried to call me last night, but I was busy, so I didn't answer it. I didn't pick it up. So I feel really guilty now. So, but I'm glad you were there, my friend. I'm glad you were there in the corner. But our friend, Mr. Shaps, okay, with his, he's also now come round to the fact that, with this testing and the fact that it started yesterday and the results were back in an hour, that it will do wonders to reduce the amount of quarantine, which is obviously what everybody
absolutely
needs.
Yeah, I think that I've not seen it yet, but I know from my discussions with Heathrow this week, there's due to be an interview in the evening, London Evening Standard tonight with John Holland Kay. Yeah. I haven't seen if it's been published yet, but a little bit of breaking news there, I guess. But John Holland Kay speaking about the importance of testing and actually what Heathrow have done to help the airline community. So if it's not there, apologies for letting the cat out of the bag, but this will go out tomorrow after the news should have been there in any case.
There you go. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of being early. But you're 100% right. And again, the level of communication and understanding and how to communicate has got to be improved as well, because now everybody knows how safe it is whilst you're sitting on an aircraft, and fair play to IATA for driving that. Now what they need is they need to be confident to understand all of the things that go on behind the scenes from when they leave their front door to when they get on the door of the aircraft. And it's all of those touch points on what goes on with the hygiene, every single thing that goes on behind the scenes. That level of communication needs to be there so people can understand. And then we come to a little bit of a conundrum, which is transit. So if you're going to be transiting, okay, and if there's testing, then surely we can get a sterile sort of transit bubble and have redesigned processes to, again, give people the confidence that once you're in that whole process, everything is as best as it possibly can. And the most important thing is wear these masks. Wear them, wherever you can. That's your biggest defense. So that transit area is something that's important as well, Steve.
I think that was on my list of questions for the Secretary of State last night, but unfortunately we didn't get to it. But we'll pick it up again with them when we can. But you're absolutely right. I think speaking to a couple of colleagues this week, they've made that known. That is an issue, because actually the transit hubs are really critical to long haul.
Yeah.
Long haul is extremely critical to air cargo and freight availability in terms of providing that space. So actually, if we make it harder for customers, to travel, actually what that does is of course it dilutes the revenue bias on the flight base, and therefore it's only going to all be about cargo, and therefore that puts into question the viability of the route in total. If we have got a transit solution that means you don't have to go into quarantine, actually that means that potentially we can get some of these routes back up and running sooner, because we've taken away the quarantine requirement for passengers. So you could start, from a non-quarantine market, but end up going to a transit hub, and then you're straight into 14 days. That doesn't sound sensible to me, particularly on the numbers that IATA were putting out this week. Word of caution, however, of course, most of those journeys were between January and February, so I was a little bit skeptical in some of the numbers IATA were using to suggest there'd been X number of cases over X billion journeys, but of course we know that most of the journeys were between January and March before demand fell through a cliff. So just for balance purposes, I'm advising of that. But you're absolutely right. I think that is a hole that needs to be filled, Chris. Like always.
Now, when you see or you hear one of your first Walt Disney films, or you look at a book with kids or grandkids, it always starts with once upon a time, and then it likes to end with, and they lived happily ever after. Now, I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm pretty sure that everybody behind the scenes now is trying to do as much as possible to allow this window for Christmas and festivities, because then it's going to go into another tough period from January through to probably March, April time. So with that Christmas spirit in mind, I'm sure that these tough measures, you know, there's got to be some sort of purpose to it. And I'm hoping that that's one of the things that are going to be hanging around. So whether it's students having their quarantine before they go home for Christmas, whether it's closing things up now, so at least people can be given an opportunity to do things. And hopefully if they learn the lessons correctly, then it won't be so bad again. But one good bit of news for Christmas, the Canary Islands have been added now to the safe travel list. So that's an opportunity for people to get away for a bit of sunshine. Well, there you go. You're always ahead of the game, my friend, always ahead of the game. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for them to get away and get a bit of sunshine. And
sorry, Chris, I was just going to say, look, I guess Christmas is interesting, but maybe it's only Christians that sort of worry about that ability to celebrate Christmas, because my Muslim friends missed out on Eid this year. Christians missed out on Easter, actually the most sort of holy of the Christian festivals, more so than Christmas, I think, to many people, certainly according to the Bible it is. And my Hindu family have got Diwali coming up in 2 weeks' time, and that will likely be a write-off because Malaysia's just about to go into a state of emergency again.
Yes.
And so I would say, whilst it's all very interesting talking about Christmas, we mustn't forget that is relevant to one faith. Although from a commercial perspective, it seems to be applicable to many more than the followers of such a faith, but of said faith. But look, I hear what you're saying. Christmas is an important time for a lot of people, but there are other events that others have had to forego, particularly when you look at things like, Hajj and travels and so on. So I think, look, Christmas will be what it will be. I think philosophically, if they can do what they can to protect Christmas, wonderful. If they can't, because public safety measures determine that there is no Christmas, or there's no Christmas festivities, because Christmas certainly won't be cancelled. It happens on the same day every year. But yeah, I understand it's important for a lot of families, and particularly children. It's an event that means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah, but equally, you're right. You're right in in saying about all the different religions and cultures and everything. I mean, that everybody's been inconvenienced. Everybody's been put to task, and everybody's been disappointed. So it's a terrible thing. It's just that if one thing starts to happen and people learn from it, then hopefully things will lead on from there. So that's the main thing. Now, you mentioned Malaysian Airlines. And lots of organisations and companies now are going through a restructuring exercise.
Yeah, I think, this week we've seen some news from Malaysia Airlines and also Cathay Pacific, actually. Cathay sort of published their transformation plan, which, sadly will see the closure of for those that remember, Dragon Air, as was, then latterly more recently Cathay Dragon. That's quite sad. I think personally, I think the Cathay obviously were coming slightly unstuck before the pandemic took effect, Chris, for the obvious Hong Kong political issues we'd spoken about previously, that I'll stay away from this time for fear of upsetting anybody. Plus, I'm a bit of a xenophile, as you know, so I'll tread with caution there. But also, look, Malaysia Airlines, they've been very public this week, and the government supporting a potential transfer of sort of national carrier status and backing from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the National Sovereign Wealth Fund, Khazanah, to one of the Malaysia Airlines subsidiaries as a separate AOC. And of course, that means that a lot of the, taking a turboprop operation to become the new Malaysia Airlines, it'll be Mark III, actually, because they did this a few years ago, when MAS became Malaysia Airlines Group, then it became Malaysia Airlines, but had MAB. So I think a lot of work going on there. Malaysian, sadly, was starting to turn the corner before this had happened. And of course, it put them back to square one. But I think if you look at that region, Chris, Singapore Airlines in terrible strife, Cathay Pacific in terrible strife, Malaysia Airlines, Thai Airways been a basket case for as long as I can remember, as long as I worked in aviation. All sorts of corruption cases and active stuff going on there as well, which seems terribly distracting to them. But you know, whilst they're firing thousands of staff, they're promoting some of their cronies, you know. So that's very sad. Thai is a brand that people will know well, and Thailand, of course, is, you know, Bangkok's the #1 visited city in the world.
Yep.
And Thailand relies, I think 60% of Thailand's GDP is from tourism. So Thai obviously and stuff. But look, you know, as the one door opens or one door closes, another opens. So there may be opportunities for others that are more agile, other carriers that are more agile to fill some of those gaps, sadly, if those carriers go by the wayside. But difficult time for many.
It is indeed. And coming back to Sean Doyle's question, you know, will the industry ever be the same as it was? I think everybody knows it won't be the same, but it will be different in many different ways, and it needs to be as well. So, but, you know, we've got to be optimistic. We've got to look forward, but definitely a very, very, very tough 5 to 7 months ahead for everybody.
Yeah, indeed.
Stephen, end of this week's show.
Great show.
Great to have you. All right, as
Good
always.
to be here. Who knows
sure.
where I'll be next week, Chris?
Who knows, my friend? Who knows? But if you speak to Matt, don't forget to apologise that I wasn't available. I didn't recognise the number. All right.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Take care. All the best.